Stellantis saying it is moving production of its Jeep Compass from Ontario to the United States, and the automaker had previously paused production at that facility in Brampton in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's
Stellantis, the maker of Jeep, plans to add 5,000 jobs. Whirlpool announced a $300 million investment and new jobs in Ohio.
No one in Ontario could quite comprehend what had just unfolded. What initially felt like a devastating setback unexpectedly became a turning point that no one had anticipated. On a cold morning in Brampton, more than 3,000 workers quietly walked away from their stations at the Stellantis plant, where the Jeep Compass had been built for years. There was a heavy sense in the air that it might be their last shift. Soon after, their fears were confirmed. Stellantis officially announced it would end production at the facility and shift operations to Belvidere, Illinois. The move meant a loss of approximately 3,000 jobs in Brampton, sending shockwaves across Ontario. Local leaders called it a betrayal of the community, and Premier Doug Ford voiced strong frustration, blaming U.S. tax policies for striking a serious blow to Canada's auto industry. Media coverage quickly zeroed in on the potential job losses, concerns over supply chain disruption, and fears that Ontario could lose its place as the country's automotive hub. Across every level of government, Canadian leaders condemned Stellantis for going back on its word, accusing the company of abandoning Canadian workers in favor of American subsidies. Many pointed fingers at U.S. President Donald Trump and his trade policies for creating the conditions that led to the shift. As public outrage grew, a different kind of response was taking shape behind closed doors. Ottawa wasn't interested in public protests or grandstanding. Instead, it began quietly preparing a strategic counter-move. Rather than retaliate, the federal government focused on rewriting the rules of engagement through legal contracts, binding clauses, and policy measures designed to ensure that companies like Stellantis couldn't walk away from their commitments without consequences. The federal government had invested millions into the Brampton facility based on Stellantis' promise to develop a new model there. When that promise was broken, Ottawa made it clear the company would be held accountable. Canada's approach wasn't loud or reactive. It was deliberate and rooted in long-term planning. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly laid out Ottawa's stance unambiguously. Any federal financial support would now come with strict conditions. If a company wanted public funds, then production had to happen in Canada. No negotiations, no exceptions. That message was directed not only at Stellantis, but at any multinational looking to benefit from Canadian incentives. Behind the scenes, officials began invoking breach of contract provisions, demanding accountability, and exploring legal options if Stellantis failed to deliver a replacement project. What were once seen as government incentives became powerful tools to secure industrial investment and protect Canadian jobs. The announcement of Stellantis' withdrawal came just days after Washington introduced new tariffs targeting Canada, a sign that the trade tensions between the two countries were becoming more than just political posturing. In response, Prime Minister Mark Carney promised that his government would take every possible step to defend Canadian workers and pivot toward industries of the future, especially electric vehicle, EV, battery manufacturing, now at the core of Canada's new economic strategy. Rather than panic, Canada used the moment to reframe its future. And that legal, measured approach quickly paid off. What began as a move to hold Stellantis accountable grew into something far more transformative, a blueprint for a new era of Canadian manufacturing. Stellantis, alongside LG Energy Solution, committed to building NextStar Energy, a battery plant set to become the largest manufacturing facility in Canadian history. This was no longer about trying to replace lost jobs. It became a national statement that Canada could adapt and lead on its own terms. With over $5 billion invested, the NextStar project in Windsor marked a fundamental shift from traditional auto assembly toward high-tech, clean energy manufacturing. Once operational, the facility was designed to produce 45 to 49.5 gigawatt hours of battery capacity per year, enough to power approximately 450,000 electric vehicles annually. Over 9,000 construction workers poured their efforts into building the complex, transforming Windsor into a symbol of modern Canadian industry. By the first quarter of 2024, just 2 years after Stellantis left Brampton, production lines were humming again. In an ironic twist, the same company that once shut its doors had become a cornerstone of Canada's new economic future. What initially looked like a crushing blow had become a story of renewal, not through retaliation, but through strategic reinvention. Perhaps the most impressive part of Canada's response is that it wasn't driven by outrage, but by vision. When the US passed its Inflation Reduction Act with massive subsidies for clean energy and domestic manufacturing, Canada knew it had to act. Stellantis paused construction at NextStar and pushed for incentives matching those in the US, creating yet another moment of crisis. But this time, Canada was ready, with a legal, economic, and strategic framework that allowed it to stay competitive and push back from a position of strength. A calculated standoff followed Stellantis' decision, putting Ottawa's determination to the test. But instead of backing down, Canada held its ground and responded with a bold, strategic move. The federal and Ontario governments came together to offer a massive 12.2 billion Canadian dollars production incentive package, 5.4 billion from the province, plus $1 billion for infrastructure, amounting to nearly 15 billion US dollars over a 10-year period. Many experts saw this as a direct and effective counter to the US Inflation Reduction Act. If the US was using subsidies to protect and attract jobs, Canada showed it could compete, and perhaps even outperform. The outcome was clear. Stellantis stayed. Windsor, Ontario, rose to become a new hub for advanced manufacturing, and Canada turned what looked like a subsidy race into a competitive advantage within the North American electric vehicle (EV) supply chain. Brampton may have lost its factory, but Windsor gained a future. The rise of NextStar Energy didn't just recover the lost jobs, it sparked a surge of new investment and economic momentum. In a short span, Windsor-Essex earned the nickname Battery Valley, becoming the beating heart of Canada's EV sector. Over 1,200 new jobs were created, easily absorbing the displaced workforce from Brampton. By October 2025, more than 1,000 full-time employees were already on the NextStar payroll. The economic boom attracted over $100 million US dollars in supplier investments, including a $60 million US dollars commitment from South Korea's DS Actimo for its first North American facility. The city of Windsor played its part too, offering generous incentives, including a 20-year property tax exemption and a 99-year land lease agreement, helping the city solidify its status as a top destination for EV manufacturers. Economists now predict Canada will experience 2.9% growth between 2025 and 2028, the fastest pace in the country. What began as a defensive move after a plant closure evolved into a carefully executed industrial strategy. It demonstrated how proactive policymaking and smart international cooperation can reshape an economy quietly but effectively. While many US auto plants are battling rising costs and bureaucratic delays, Canada chose a different path. Rather than focus on the final stages of vehicle assembly, the country invested heavily in the upstream parts of the supply chain: batteries, components, and clean technology. In trying to recover from an initial shock, Canada unexpectedly positioned itself as a global player. From Windsor's Battery Valley, Canada now exports not only electric vehicles, but also the technologies that power them. More than 46 billion US dollars has been invested by automakers into Canada's domestic supply chains, backed by over 52.5 billion US dollars in public funding, a level of support that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Although exports to the United States dipped by 7.9% in 2024 during the transition, trade with Europe and Central Asia surged by 23.5%, reaching the highest level since 2007. Europe's energy crisis opened up new opportunities, and Canada moved quickly to seize them. Ottawa positioned the country as a reliable, transparent, and stable supplier of clean energy components at a time when global markets started prioritizing safety and accountability over cost. Canadian battery shipments now leave from the port of Montreal, bound for EV plants in Germany and France. What started as a local job-saving measure has evolved into a bold expression of global ambition. Canada's strength, it turns out, doesn't come from chasing headlines, but from quietly leading the clean technology revolution. This was never just about one company closing a plant. It was about a country turning adversity into opportunity. Stellantis may have stepped back, but in doing so, it inadvertently helped Canada secure one of the most critical battery production hubs in North America. Ottawa proved that calm, calculated decision-making can sometimes be more powerful than loud, reactive measures. From the ashes of a factory closure, Canada built a new supply chain, one resilient to US tariffs and attractive to global investors. As Washington continues to wrestle with rising costs and political uncertainty, Canada stands out as a model of stability, clarity, and long-term thinking. Now the question is this a short-term win or the beginning of a brand new industrial era? Perhaps the real story isn't whether Canada won or lost, but how it's redefining what economic leadership looks like in a turbulent world. Canada doesn't shout, it builds, it endures, and in doing so, it may have unlocked a new kind of influence, one rooted in trust, strategy, and resilience. What do you think? Are we witnessing the true resurgence of Canadian manufacturing, or just another chapter in an ongoing trade war? Please subscribe to the Timefold channel, and don't forget to like.